Limpopo, a land of light and shadow, where time slows and the earth remembers everything. But in 2010, something happened that even the earth refused to reveal. A convoy of 6 military vehicles drove into the bush Veld and vanished. No wreckage, no remains, just the echo of engines swallowed by silence. Leading that mission was Colonel Jacob Maseko, a man known for discipline, faith, and secrets. Some say he was investigating illegal arms routes. Others say he was hunting something far stranger. Whatever happened that night left behind nothing but whispers. Whispers of forbidden experiments, of lights in the sky, and a place known only as the Valley of Echoes. Welcome to Mystery Vault. Before we descend into this case, take a moment to pause, like, share, and subscribe. It helps this channel uncover more of the stories hidden beneath history's silence. Now, let's open the vault and step into the shadows of Limpopo, where Colonel Maseko's final mission became one of South Africa's most chilling enigmas. The Vanishing Convoy. February 18th, 2010, Limpopo, South Africa. The morning began like any other in the Bushveld, dry, golden light across the horizon, the hum of cicadas in the heat. At precisely 0600 hours, a South African military convoy departed Mikado Air Base under the command of Colonel Jacob Maseko, a respected strategist known for precision, discipline, and secrecy. Their destination remains uncertain to this day. Their route, erased from every available record. 6 vehicles, all fully fueled, fully armed, and carrying 20 soldiers. They rolled out of the base under official clearance, witnessed by several personnel. But within just 2 hours, the convoy's radio signals began to distort. Strange echoes, static patterns, and fragments of words. Then, one final transmission. Command, convoy entering restricted valley. Silence. Search teams were deployed by evening, tracing the convoy's supposed route through dense scrubland and abandoned roads. But by nightfall, there was nothing. No sign of tracks. No burned vehicles. No footprints. Just empty space, as if the desert itself had swallowed them whole. One aerial scan from the following day revealed something strange. A dark circular patch on satellite imagery near an area locals called the Valley of Echoes. Yet, when the same coordinates were examined 24 hours later, the mark was gone. Villagers later told stories of strange lights that night, hovering orbs that shimmered silently, then vanished in the blink of an eye. To this day, the South African military has refused to acknowledge the existence of that convoy. All personnel listed on the manifest were quietly marked as transferred, but people close to Maseko believe the colonel was on a secret mission, one that reached far beyond ordinary military protocol. Some claim he uncovered something he shouldn't have. Others say he was chasing something that wasn't meant to be found. In the silence of the Limpopo night, the bush still remembers the rumble of unseen engines and the whispers of men who vanished into the veldt. This was the convoy that never returned. The first chapter in a mystery that refuses to die. The desert that erased them. In the 72 hours following Colonel Jacob Maseko's disappearance, the official search operation unfolded in secrecy. The military called it a standard recovery effort, but to those who lived near Mikado, it felt like a cover-up from the very start. Helicopters patrolled the skies day and night, yet no debris, no heat signatures, and no tire impressions were ever found. The landscape itself seemed to reject evidence, as though the earth had swallowed its own secrets. The first recovery team reported strange compass malfunctions and erratic GPS readings as they moved deeper into the region. Instruments failed without explanation. Radio signals flickered in and out, producing static patterns that some operators later described as rhythmic, almost like a coded pulse. The team followed what little data they could find, a trail of faint magnetic anomalies leading west toward an area locals called Nzilo, the Walking Fire. It was said that strange lights had been seen dancing across that land for generations. Farmers avoided it. Animals wouldn't graze there. When investigators arrived, they discovered something haunting, small, circular patches of scorched sand, perfectly symmetrical, spaced in precise intervals. No footprints led to or from them. The air smelled faintly of ozone, like after a lightning strike, yet there had been no storms in weeks. The soldiers documented everything with cameras and sample kits. But when they returned to base, the footage was corrupted, entire reels of data unreadable, memory cards burned out despite no visible damage. Officially, the report listed environmental interference. Word spread quickly through nearby villages. Some locals said they heard deep rumbling sounds beneath the earth that night, like machinery moving underground. Others swore they saw an orange light rise from the valley and vanish into the sky. Yet, as these accounts circulated, something strange began to happen. Witnesses who spoke publicly were visited by unidentified men, warned to remain silent. Some relocated. Others simply stopped talking. Meanwhile, the families of the missing soldiers grew desperate. They were told that their loved ones had been transferred or reassigned, but none of them received letters, calls, or pay slips. It was as if the men had been erased from existence. Researchers later uncovered inconsistencies in military records, dates altered, vehicle serial numbers mismatched, and fuel reports rewritten. The deeper they dug, the clearer it became. Someone inside the system wanted this case buried. But for those who believed in the supernatural, the story took a darker turn. They claimed that the convoy had driven into what they called a thin place, a zone where reality folds upon itself. A few local shamans suggested that the area near Nzillo was a boundary between worlds, a site of ancient energy that consumes anything that disturbs it. Whether viewed through logic or legend, the facts remain the same. 20 soldiers and 6 vehicles disappeared under open skies without a single verifiable trace. And as the sun set on the third day, the air over the Limpopo Valley fell unnaturally still. Radios went quiet. The search teams withdrew. And in the heart of the wilderness, only the wind continued to move, whispering stories of the convoy that entered the desert and never returned. Shadows behind the uniform. By the end of the first week, the official narrative surrounding Colonel Jacob Maseko's disappearance had already begun to crumble. The Defense Ministry's public statement, a transport delay during routine maneuvers, was met with disbelief. Soldiers on base whispered that the top brass were hiding something, while off-duty officers quietly passed around fragments of leaked reports. In every version of events, one thing was clear. Someone was controlling the story. At Mikado Air Base, the atmosphere grew heavy with silence. Military police patrolled the compound in greater numbers, confiscating documents and restricting outgoing communication. Even senior officers were told not to discuss the incident. It was as though the entire base had been placed under an unspoken lockdown. But leaks are like cracks in glass, impossible to seal once they start spreading. A journalist from the Limpopo Chronicle, Lindau Kumalo, received an anonymous envelope. Inside were blurred photocopies of internal correspondence between officers. One letter, dated the same night the convoy vanished, contained a single disturbing phrase. Convoy diverted per classified directive. Authorization, Omega Unit. No one had ever heard of an Omega Unit. Not within the South African Defense Force. Not in any record accessible to the public. When Kumalo tried to verify it, her calls were redirected, then abruptly cut off. Within 24 hours, she received a formal notice from the Defense Ministry warning her not to publish national security-sensitive material. But journalists rarely stop at warnings. Meanwhile, the families of the missing soldiers gathered outside the base gates, demanding a public inquiry. They were ignored. Instead, plainclothes officers approached several family members, offering financial support packages in exchange for silence. Some accepted, fearing for their safety. Others refused, determined to uncover what really happened in the desert. In nearby villages, rumors swirled that Colonel Maseko had stumbled upon something dangerous, a hidden weapons program or illegal trade routes running through the border. Some whispered that the convoy had been transporting more than equipment, that the colonel was carrying sensitive data meant for international allies. A retired intelligence officer, speaking under anonymity years later, claimed that Maseko had been in contact with a high-level oversight committee in Pretoria days before the mission. His message reportedly warned of unauthorized military activity within Limpopo, operations conducted without government approval. Could Maseko have been silenced for knowing too much? Then came the first real piece of physical evidence, a damaged satellite phone, found by a local farmer near the outskirts of the Battler Flats. The device was half buried in sand but still functional enough for forensic recovery. When analyzed, it contained a single outgoing call made at 2:14 a.m. on the night of the disappearance, just 3 minutes after all convoy signals went dark. The number dialed wasn't military. It belonged to a private communications company registered to a foreign contractor in Johannesburg, later linked to security consulting for mining operations across southern Africa. What was a military colonel doing contacting a civilian firm in the middle of the night during an active transport mission? The deeper investigators dug, the stranger the puzzle became. Logs showed that the convoy's last radio transmission mentioned a roadblock ahead, but none was reported by local law enforcement or military units. When search teams reached that section of road days later, there were no signs of a roadblock at all. No debris, no tracks, no evidence that anyone had ever been there. Then came the most chilling discovery of all, a second convoy manifest found hidden in Maseko's personal locker. The original record listed 21 personnel. The second, unsigned version listed 23. Two names appeared that didn't exist in any official file. No service numbers, no birth records, no photographs. Ghost soldiers. Who were they? And why were they added to the list? For investigators, this changed everything. The disappearance was no longer seen as an accident or random attack. It was now viewed as a potential internal operation, a mission within a mission. In whispered circles, the case began earning a new nickname among officers and journalists alike. Operation Black Silence. No one knew who coined it, but the title stuck. It symbolized the perfect description of what the event had become, an operation wrapped in secrecy, executed under darkness, and followed by silence from those who knew the truth. As days turned to weeks, leads dried up. Witnesses grew fearful. And somewhere deep within the files of the Defense Ministry, reports were buried under layers of red tape, marked classified, level Omega. And for those still searching for answers, one haunting question refused to fade. If the disappearance of Colonel Maseko wasn't the result of an ambush or a navigational error, then who ordered the convoy to vanish? The trail of deception. For weeks, official investigators combed the Limpopo wilderness, but as the physical search reached its dead end, a new kind of investigation began. One that dug not through sand or bush, but through bureaucracy, classified files, and political shadows. The South African Defense Force had, by then, issued its final statement. The disappearance of Colonel Maseko and his men remain a matter of operational uncertainty. Further information is restricted. Those final two words, information restricted, became a national insult. Veteran officers knew what it meant. The trail didn't end because there was nothing to find. It ended because someone decided it should. Within Pretoria's Ministry of Defense, a quiet internal audit began. On paper, it was a routine compliance review. But in practice, it was something else entirely. A covert probe into missing assets, off-book communications, and unsanctioned fuel requests traced back to Maseko's unit. One anomaly stood out immediately. The convoy had been authorized for a 300-kilometer range, but fuel requisitions suggested a journey nearly twice that distance, almost enough to reach the borders of Zimbabwe. Why would a convoy assigned to internal logistics need that much fuel? When auditors requested detailed route logs, they were told the GPS data had been lost due to a system crash. The crash, as it turned out, occurred on the same day the convoy vanished. Coincidence or cover-up? Then came the missing funds. A routine audit revealed over 1.2 million rand in unaccounted operational allowances issued in the weeks leading up to the mission. The payments were authorized under the signature of a retired colonel, now living in Bloemfontein. When questioned, he denied all knowledge of it, claiming his credentials were stolen. The deeper investigators went, the more the walls closed in. Documents began to disappear from storage. Whistleblowers were reassigned. One intelligence officer, who'd privately confided to a journalist that Maseko's mission wasn't just transport, was found dead in his home. The scene ruled a suicide. But there was one man who refused to stay silent. Captain Samuel Kosa, a logistics officer stationed in Polokwane. Kosa claimed to have received encrypted communications from Maseko's team days before they vanished. Messages that mentioned something called Project Dawnlight. When investigators tried to verify this, Kosa's office was cleared out overnight. He was transferred to a temporary foreign assignment and never heard from again. Project Dawnlight. It appeared nowhere in Defense Force archives, yet references to it surfaced in at least 3 separate communications from 2009 to 2011, all heavily redacted. Each was marked with a clearance level reserved only for top intelligence operations. Whatever Project Dawnlight was, it was above the rank of colonel. At this stage, investigative journalists began piecing together their own theory, that Maseko's convoy wasn't carrying standard equipment at all, but something that tied into a secret weapons initiative. Rumors circulated about experimental drone components, imported illegally from Europe and tested on remote African terrain. If that were true, then the disappearance wasn't just tragic, it was politically explosive. The scandal threatened to implicate senior officials, both within South Africa and abroad. But then, something even stranger surfaced. An anonymous insider, who claimed to have worked in defense communications, leaked a single audio file to a Johannesburg newspaper. The file contained a transmission recorded the night the convoy vanished. The voice, identified later as Colonel Maseko's, sounded calm but urgent. "This is Echo 1. We've been diverted. Orders came through Omega. Road not listed. If you hear this, tell." The message cut off. Seconds later, static. Then a faint metallic hum, something that analysts couldn't explain. Sound engineers later determined the hum matched no known vehicle or frequency distortion pattern. It was unlike anything heard on South African radio bands. Was it interference? Or something else entirely? Theories spiraled, ranging from clandestine military tech to something much darker. In both camps, the rational and the speculative, the meaning was clear. Maseko and his men had entered a zone not meant to exist. And if the Defense Force was burying the truth, perhaps they weren't just hiding how he vanished. But why? Meanwhile, in the small town of Messina, a retired truck driver came forward claiming to have seen something that night. He described a column of vehicles heading north under military escort, but not the kind of vehicles you'd expect. These weren't army trucks, he said. They were white, civilian, unmarked. The soldiers looked tense, like they were guarding something, not driving it. His statement was dismissed, of course. It didn't fit the official timeline. But for the few journalists still brave enough to chase the story, that testimony was a spark in the darkness, a small confirmation that Maseko's last hours may have been witnessed, however briefly, by an unsuspecting civilian. The question now shifted from where did the convoy go, to what exactly were they carrying, and who wanted it hidden so badly that an entire operation vanished to protect it. Leads in the shadows. As the search for Colonel Jacob Maseko's convoy stretched into its second week, investigators began focusing on fragments of evidence that had previously been overlooked. Satellite images showed subtle disturbances in the Battler Flats, faint enough to be dismissed at first, but distinct when analyzed under thermal and infrared scans. Shadows and depressions in the sand suggested movement, yet no vehicles or personnel were ever captured. At the same time, leaked intelligence reports hinted at communications between Maseko's unit and unknown parties outside the South African military. Analysts discovered that several encrypted messages, transmitted just hours before the disappearance, were routed through servers in Johannesburg, Cape Town, and even as far away as Lisbon, Portugal. Each message was deleted within minutes, but metadata remained. The recipients were identified as private military contractors and logistics companies with no publicly documented links to the Defense Force. Military investigators also began interviewing locals who had witnessed unusual activity. One farmer recalled seeing a convoy approaching the area days prior to the mission, accompanied by unmarked white vans that didn't match any Army specifications. The men in the vans wore civilian clothing, carried crates that seemed far too large for standard field equipment, and moved with a sense of urgency. Official inquiries into these reports were quickly stonewalled. Documentation was either classified or misfiled, and officers attempting to follow these leads faced internal warnings. One officer, who asked to remain anonymous, later said that the chain of command seemed more interested in erasing any trace than finding the truth. Meanwhile, Colonel Maseko's family became increasingly involved. His wife, Thandi Maseko, refused to accept the official narrative that he had vanished due to miscommunication or navigational error. She began her own inquiries, contacting retired officers, journalists, and private investigators. Through her persistence, she uncovered references to Project Dawnlight, the same mysterious operation hinted at in the encrypted messages. The details were sparse, but every shred of information pointed toward covert experimentation or unauthorized operations deep in the Limpopo bush. Evidence suggested the convoy may have been carrying sensitive materials, possibly prototype military equipment or highly classified documents, that could not fall into public hands. At the same time, journalists following the case received unverified tips suggesting foreign involvement. Certain materials being transported allegedly had connections to private security firms operating in Angola, Mozambique, and even North America. While these claims could not be substantiated, the timing of the disappearance and the presence of unaccounted-for communications made them impossible to ignore. One particularly chilling development occurred when a former soldier claimed that on the night of the disappearance, unusual aerial activity had been observed. Witnesses reported seeing a cluster of lights hovering in patterns inconsistent with conventional aircraft. Radar logs, however, showed no flights in the area at the time. Military officials dismissed these accounts, yet they fueled speculation that the convoy might have been intercepted by unknown forces, either human or technological. The investigators also analyzed the terrain itself. The Battler Flats presented a unique and treacherous landscape. Dense patches of bush, sudden depressions, and unmarked valleys where traditional tracking was nearly impossible. Satellite mapping revealed that certain regions had anomalous magnetic readings, which could interfere with GPS devices and radio signals. It was plausible, investigators considered, that the convoy had entered an area that disrupted navigation, leaving them effectively invisible to standard tracking methods. As weeks passed, the story became a patchwork of official statements, leaked files, eyewitness accounts, and circumstantial evidence. One thread became increasingly clear. Colonel Maseko had not simply gotten lost. Something, or someone, had orchestrated events that led to the convoy's disappearance. By the end of this chapter, a pattern emerged: deliberate misdirection, hidden communications, and carefully erased evidence suggested that the truth was being buried systematically. Yet, amid these shadows, certain pieces could not be erased. Small signs, a damaged GPS, intercepted radio chatter, unaccounted-for communications, hinted at a larger, more complex operation than anyone had imagined. Investigators now faced a choice: either follow the trail within the official channels, risking obstruction and suppression, or pursue unconventional leads that could uncover the full story. The decisions made in the coming days would determine whether the mystery of Colonel Maseko's convoy would remain forever unsolved or finally come to light. Hints of a cover-up. By the 6th week after the disappearance, the search for Colonel Maseko and his convoy had transitioned from field operations to a web of investigations buried in offices, files, and encrypted communications. The physical trail had grown cold, but the anomalies were multiplying. Every discovery pointed toward deliberate concealment. Investigators re-examined the convoy's departure schedule and found inconsistencies in the documentation. Official logs recorded departure at 0600 hours, yet fuel receipts, and checkpoint reports suggested the convoy had been on the road as early as 0530. Timing discrepancies like this may have seemed minor, but in a military operation, every minute counts. Further, interviews with soldiers stationed at Mikado revealed whispered accounts of an extra briefing that Colonel Maseko had attended 2 days before the mission. The briefing was not on any official schedule and reportedly included a small group of high-ranking officers discussing operations codenamed Omega Directive and Project Dawnlight. No record of the briefing existed in official logs, and those who attended were sworn to secrecy. Meanwhile, forensic teams reviewing the damaged satellite phone found evidence of deleted messages that had been deliberately erased. One message, recovered through specialized data reconstruction, appeared to be an outgoing call to a number traced to a private security contractor in Johannesburg. The content was heavily redacted, but analysts inferred that it included coordinates, instructions, and a warning about an imminent operation, possibly related to the convoy's route. As the investigation progressed, the families of the missing soldiers became increasingly vocal. Thandi Maseko, the colonel's wife, discovered that communications between the convoy and the base had been edited in official reports. Logs that should have included every radio exchange were incomplete or rewritten. It was clear that someone in authority had tampered with records, creating a sanitized version of events that made it appear as if the convoy had vanished without cause. Journalists following the case received similar confirmations. Anonymous tips pointed toward a network of shadow operations, some possibly involving foreign entities. There were references to surveillance equipment, unregistered vehicles, and personnel that existed only on paper. A few leaks suggested the convoy might have been carrying classified technology or intelligence that could have triggered international interest. Satellite imagery continued to yield subtle but puzzling results. Infrared scans revealed heat signatures in the bush that were inconsistent with the convoy's vehicles. Some areas displayed transient patterns, as if temporary structures or equipment had been placed and removed within hours. Experts noted that these anomalies were too precise to be natural. Meanwhile, the broader military command downplayed these findings. Briefings issued to the public described the area as remote and difficult to survey. Official statements emphasized routine operational delays and temporary miscommunication, avoiding any mention of missing soldiers or classified missions. At the same time, independent investigators started tracking the so-called Omega Directive. Through whistleblower reports, they discovered that certain military communications had been rerouted to private accounts and foreign servers, bypassing standard monitoring. The motive appeared to be containment, ensuring that sensitive information about operations remained outside public scrutiny. Local eyewitnesses also contributed fragments of information. Some reported seeing unmarked vehicles and men in civilian clothing near the convoy's expected route. Others described lights in the sky, similar to drones or helicopters, but these sightings were never confirmed. While these accounts were anecdotal, they added to the growing suspicion that external forces had been involved in the disappearance. For the first time, investigators began to consider the possibility of intentional interception. Could the convoy have been waylaid deliberately? If so, by whom? And for what purpose? Each question led to more questions, creating a complex puzzle that stretched from the plains of Limpopo to offices in Pretoria and beyond. By the end of this chapter, the investigation had reached a turning point. Physical evidence remained scarce, but the combination of record manipulation, eyewitness testimony, and recovered communications pointed strongly toward a deliberate, orchestrated disappearance. It was no accident. Colonel Maseko and his men had been targeted. The central mystery had evolved. It was no longer just about finding the convoy. It was about uncovering the forces that ensured it could vanish without leaving a trace. The external factors. As the investigation stretched into its second month, attention shifted from internal discrepancies to external influences. Analysts began scrutinizing the broader environment surrounding the convoy's disappearance, both geographic and geopolitical. Limpopo's terrain is notoriously unpredictable. The Bateleur Flats and surrounding bushlands, where Maseko's convoy vanished, are sparsely populated, but not entirely empty. Local communities reported unusual activity in the days prior to the convoy's departure. Unmarked vehicles, unfamiliar personnel, and strange lights at night. These reports have been initially dismissed as rumor or superstition, yet patterns began to emerge. Satellite imagery and infrared scans revealed intermittent heat signatures in isolated areas, as if temporary camps had been set up and dismantled quickly. The pattern suggested a calculated effort to create confusion and erase traces. Experts argued that only highly trained personnel with intimate knowledge of the terrain could have executed such precise movements. At the same time, a closer look at communications revealed encrypted signals routed through servers outside South Africa. Analysts suspected foreign surveillance or intervention. Could intelligence agencies from outside the country have been monitoring or even intercepting the convoy? This possibility gained weight when journalists discovered a curious connection. A private security firm with international operations, previously contracted in Angola and Mozambique, had corresponded with the South African military shortly before the mission. Documents suggested they were involved in logistical support for undisclosed operations. While there was no official link to the convoy, the timing and proximity raised questions. On the ground, independent investigators interviewed former soldiers and local guides. One veteran claimed that the terrain where the convoy disappeared had a history of strange electromagnetic anomalies, fields that could interfere with GPS systems, radios, and vehicle electronics. If true, the convoy could have been unintentionally or intentionally blinded in navigation. In parallel, families of the missing soldiers grew restless. Colonel Maseko's wife, Thandi, began keeping her own records of sightings of unidentified vehicles near checkpoints, and accounts from local villagers. She noticed discrepancies between official logs and witness testimonies, suggesting that the convoy had been rerouted through areas not listed in any sanctioned mission plan. Meanwhile, whistleblowers hinted at the existence of an Omega Directive, a high-level internal order commanding secrecy over the convoy's mission. According to these sources, the directive involved rerouting, surveillance avoidance, and possibly concealment of cargo deemed sensitive. The exact nature of the cargo remained unknown, but speculation ranged from intelligence materials to experimental military equipment. Media coverage, though limited, began piecing together these anomalies. Small outlets in Pretoria reported unusual military activity and foreign involvement, while mainstream news was largely silent, echoing official statements of routine delays and communication errors. By now, a troubling pattern was clear. Colonel Maseko's convoy had vanished not simply because of navigational errors or hostile terrain. External factors, terrain anomalies, unmarked vehicles, encrypted communications, and possible foreign interest suggested deliberate interference. Yet, concrete proof remained elusive. Every clue uncovered by independent investigators seemed to vanish into bureaucracy, secrecy, or simple technical ambiguity. Satellite images were incomplete, communications logs were redacted, and eyewitness reports conflicted. Despite these obstacles, one thing became evident. The disappearance was orchestrated with precision. Someone, somewhere, had prepared for this operation well in advance, controlling both what could be seen and what would be hidden. And as investigators delved deeper, the line between accident, conspiracy, and something more unexplainable began to blur. The mystery of the missing convoy was no longer contained to Limpopo. Its ripples extended into corridors of power, across borders, and into the very heart of classified operations that the public would never fully see. The questions persisted. Who had the resources to execute such a precise disappearance? What exactly was being hidden? And could the truth ever be fully uncovered? Breakthroughs and shadows. Weeks turned into months, and what began as a search for Colonel Maseko's convoy had evolved into a labyrinthine investigation. Analysts and independent investigators were beginning to connect the scattered dots, revealing a picture more complex than anyone had imagined. One of the first breakthroughs came from satellite and infrared data. A team of independent analysts noticed unusual thermal patterns in the Battler Flats. The heat signatures didn't correspond to vehicles in motion, but instead formed precise geometric shapes over a concentrated area. These formations suggested temporary structures or equipment placements that lasted for hours, then disappeared without trace. The significance was undeniable. Whoever had orchestrated the convoy's disappearance had an intimate understanding of both the terrain and the technology used for tracking. The operation was carefully executed, leaving minimal trace. At the same time, the mysterious encrypted communications continued to yield subtle insights. Analysts recovered metadata indicating repeated attempts to override GPS signals in the convoy's path. These signals corresponded with the same timestamps as eyewitness reports of unmarked vehicles in the area. The implication was chilling. Someone may have deliberately blinded the convoy, controlling its movements without leaving any overt evidence. On the ground, independent researchers interviewed local residents who described unusual activity in the days leading up to the convoy's departure. Lights at odd hours, unmarked vehicles entering remote paths, and strange noises in the bush were all dismissed by authorities at the time. Now, however, these accounts aligned with the anomalies detected by satellites and recovered communications. Meanwhile, Colonel Maseko's family continued to pursue every lead. Thandi Maseko obtained copies of travel manifests and internal correspondence suggesting that the convoy was diverted along a route outside official records. This diversion had no documented authorization, yet all evidence indicated it was deliberate. Investigators also began exploring the theory that external actors were involved. The private security contractors mentioned in earlier reports became central to the narrative. Contracts indicated that they were operating under the radar of official oversight, coordinating logistics and surveillance in ways that could only have been premeditated. One particularly intriguing clue emerged when a retired soldier came forward, claiming knowledge of experimental field exercises conducted in Limpopo. These exercises, known only to high-level officers, involved testing new tracking disruption technology and advanced armored transport vehicles. While the connection to Maseko's convoy could not be definitively proven, it suggested that the region had been the site of classified operations coinciding with the disappearance. For journalists and investigators, these breakthroughs painted a troubling scenario. The convoy may have been intercepted not by chance, but as part of a planned operation, one involving both technology and personnel executed with exacting precision. Despite these revelations, gaps remained. No full vehicle wreckage was found. No soldiers' remains were recovered. Official military communications continued to insist on delays and miscommunications, leaving the public with a sanitized, incomplete version of events. The combination of satellite anomalies, eyewitness accounts, and leaked communications began to suggest a startling possibility. The convoy didn't simply vanish due to accident or error. It was manipulated, guided, and perhaps concealed intentionally by forces both within and possibly outside the South African Defense Force. By the end of Chapter 8, the investigation had reached a critical juncture. Patterns of interference were undeniable, the diversion route confirmed, and the involvement of outside actors could no longer be dismissed. The story was no longer just about missing soldiers. It was about a meticulously orchestrated disappearance and the murky motives behind it. The mystery deepened. Who had orchestrated the vanishing and why? Unexplained phenomena. As investigators pieced together the growing trail of evidence, the story of Colonel Maseko's convoy began to intersect with reports that seemed, at first, almost unbelievable. Unexplained phenomena in the region were now impossible to ignore. Locals had long spoken of strange lights in the night sky, particularly near the Battler Flats. At first dismissed as drones, aircraft, or even folklore, these accounts gained credibility when satellite imagery revealed patterns inconsistent with conventional vehicles or human activity. Thermal anomalies appeared in a series of straight lines and circles, arrangements too precise to occur naturally. Several witnesses recalled hearing metallic hums or vibrations just before the convoy's disappearance. While skeptics attributed these to natural causes or military exercises, analysts noted that the timing coincided exactly with the last known communications from Maseko's convoy. At the same time, independent data analysts revisited recovered communications. There were faint, intermittent signals that did not match known radio frequencies. Attempts to trace them suggested encryption, but experts could not identify the technology used. Some suggested the signals might have originated from experimental military devices, while others speculated about more unusual explanations. Meanwhile, investigative journalists uncovered a peculiar connection between Omega Directive and prior field experiments. According to retired military officers, Omega Directive had been a program designed to test both advanced surveillance and signal jamming technologies under operational conditions. While classified, some elements had reportedly been tested near the exact route of the Maseko convoy. The combination of witness reports, satellite data, and these recovered communications pointed toward an unsettling scenario. The convoy may have been intentionally routed into an area affected by experimental technology. GPS interference, disrupted communications, and anomalous signals could explain why the convoy seemingly vanished without a trace. Still, there were questions that technology alone could not answer. Why were no vehicles recovered? Why had soldiers' remains never been found? And perhaps most pressing, who authorized the diversion of a convoy into such a perilous and secretive environment? Colonel Maseko's family, growing increasingly frustrated, enlisted independent experts to analyze terrain maps, historical flight data, and the anomalies recorded. Their findings confirmed one thing. The region was deliberately selected for its remoteness, unique electromagnetic properties, and suitability for operations requiring secrecy. Whoever had orchestrated the disappearance had meticulously planned every detail. At the same time, rumors of foreign involvement persisted. Analysts noted that the convoy's last transmissions intersected with servers traced to multiple continents. While proof of international participation remained elusive, it introduced the possibility that Maseko's disappearance was part of a broader network of covert activity. As investigators began connecting these threads, the narrative shifted. The disappearance could no longer be described as a simple misadventure or accident. It was becoming clear that Colonel Maseko and his convoy had been caught in a convergence of human planning, technological experimentation, and unexplained phenomena, forces beyond the ordinary reach of any standard investigation. By the end of this chapter, the picture was more complex than ever. The convoy had entered a controlled environment, deliberately designed to obscure, mislead, and conceal. The vanished convoy was no longer just a missing military unit. It had become an enigma that straddled the line between operational secrecy and mystery, challenging the limits of conventional investigation. The mastermind emerges. By now, the investigation into Colonel Maseko's disappearance had evolved into a complex operation, drawing together intelligence analysts, journalists, independent investigators, and even international observers. The more evidence surfaced, the more it pointed toward deliberate orchestration rather than mere accident. The breakthrough came when a whistleblower, previously hidden within the Defense Ministry, provided documents confirming the existence of Project Dawnlight and the Omega Directive. These top-secret files outlined operations that required diversion of military assets without trace and the manipulation of communication channels to prevent public detection. Crucially, the documents indicated that the convoy had been deliberately routed through areas known for electromagnetic anomalies, zones ideal for masking movement from conventional tracking methods. Simultaneously, forensic analysis of recovered satellite phone data revealed encrypted messages sent to a foreign contractor involved in advanced communication systems. The content, though heavily redacted, suggested logistical coordination and real-time monitoring of the convoy's movement. Investigators deduced that the convoy's diversion and eventual disappearance were executed with precision, guided by both human and technological oversight. Family members of the missing soldiers began to realize the full scope of the orchestration. Colonel Maseko, in particular, pieced together evidence from interviews, leaked documents, and independent analysis to confront the troubling truth. The disappearance was not a simple military mishap, but a controlled operation with clear objectives. Investigators also uncovered a curious pattern in financial records. Large sums had been allocated to contractors, seemingly unrelated to standard military operations. Some payments coincided precisely with the convoy's last known movements. These funds appeared to support logistical arrangements, personnel deployment, and possibly the procurement of specialized equipment, further evidence of premeditated planning. Meanwhile, local eyewitnesses confirmed previously dismissed accounts of unmarked vehicles and unusual night activity. Their testimonies, when cross-referenced with satellite imagery and the newly recovered communications, strengthened the theory of external interference. The orchestration was deliberate, calculated, and executed with resources beyond the reach of a single unit or department. Speculation about the masterminds behind the operation became unavoidable. Analysts suggested that senior officials within the Defense Ministry, possibly in collaboration with private contractors or foreign entities, had orchestrated the disappearance. The motives remained murky. Concealment of sensitive operations, testing of advanced technology, or even silencing of Colonel Maseko, who had reportedly raised concerns about unauthorized activities. As the chapter progressed, the narrative painted a chilling picture. The vanished convoy had been lured into a controlled environment, stripped of conventional support, and effectively removed from any visible record. The combination of secrecy, technology, and authority created an almost untraceable disappearance. Yet, despite these breakthroughs, unanswered questions lingered. No bodies had been found. No definitive proof of what the convoy was carrying existed. The operation, as meticulously executed as it had been, left just enough ambiguity to fuel speculation and frustration. By the end of Chapter 10, the investigation had uncovered a critical understanding. Colonel Maseko's disappearance was no random act. It was the product of deliberate planning by a powerful network, one capable of manipulating terrain, technology, and bureaucratic systems to ensure that the convoy, and those aboard, could vanish without a trace. The stage was set for the final chapters. Investigators would now focus on tying together the threads of technology, human orchestration, and geopolitical intrigue, seeking answers that had eluded them for months. Conspiracy unfolds. As investigators pushed deeper into the case, patterns of deliberate orchestration became increasingly undeniable. What had initially appeared as a missing convoy now revealed itself as the center of a carefully planned, multi-layered operation. New leads emerged from whistleblowers within the Defense Ministry. Confidential memos indicated that Colonel Maseko had raised concerns about unsanctioned operations prior to his disappearance. These concerns were met with internal warnings and, according to some reports, threats to remain silent. Analysts concluded that his disappearance may have been preemptive, targeting someone who knew too much. Financial trails provided further insight. Funds had been routed through obscure accounts linked to private military contractors, facilitating equipment transportation and personnel movements that never officially existed. Investigators suspected these arrangements were designed to obscure the convoy's activities and prevent any traceable paper trail. Meanwhile, testimonies from local witnesses began to align more coherently. Villagers reported seeing not only unmarked vehicles, but also soldiers behaving differently from standard procedures, alert, tense, and guarded, as though protecting something of immense value. These accounts coincided with satellite imagery, showing unusual thermal activity and temporary structures in the bush, suggesting coordinated staging of operations. Encrypted communications recovered from military servers hinted at high-level oversight. Instructions for diversion, concealment, and monitoring of the convoy were evident. Analysts inferred that the operation involved multiple layers: GPS disruption, communication manipulation, and ground-level coordination. The precision suggested that only personnel with advanced training and access to top-secret projects could have executed it. At the same time, investigative journalists traced the involvement of external contractors. Evidence indicated that foreign technology specialists may have been embedded within South African operations, contributing expertise in signal interference and surveillance systems. While motives remained unclear, the collaboration implied an operation that spanned borders and extended beyond conventional military jurisdiction. Colonel Maseko's family continued to pursue the truth, tirelessly compiling witness accounts, official statements, and leaked documents. Their efforts highlighted a troubling reality. The disappearance had been engineered so meticulously that even seasoned investigators struggled to unravel it. Yet, these fragments provided critical context for understanding the scope of the operation. Analysts also began to consider the psychological aspects of the orchestration. Witness accounts described an eerie calm among the soldiers as they entered the diversion zone, behavior suggesting training, discipline, and adherence to strict operational protocols. It was clear the individuals involved were executing orders within a framework they had likely been briefed on, but whose ultimate purpose they may not have fully understood. By the end of Chapter 11, the case had crystallized into a chilling narrative. The vanished convoy was not simply lost. It had been methodically removed from the visible world by an intersection of high-level authority, technological interference, and calculated secrecy. The stage was set for the final chapter, where the investigation would attempt to reconcile these discoveries with the remaining questions: the convoy's ultimate fate, the identities of those orchestrating its disappearance, and whether the truth would ever be fully revealed. The vanishing truth. As the investigation reached its final stages, the full weight of the mystery became undeniable. Colonel Jacob Maseko and his convoy had not simply disappeared. They had been absorbed into a web of secrecy that spanned military hierarchy, foreign contractors, and experimental operations. Despite recovered communications, satellite imagery, witness testimony, and leaked documents, the central question remained unanswered. Where exactly had the convoy gone, and why had no trace of it ever surfaced? Analysis of the diversion route, combined with electromagnetic anomalies and GPS interference, confirmed one terrifying possibility. The convoy had been routed into a zone designed to obscure all evidence. Whether by advanced technology, human orchestration, or a combination of both, the convoy's disappearance was total and deliberate. Investigators also revisited Project Dawnlight and the Omega Directive. The evidence suggested these programs were designed to test highly sensitive operations, with the Maseko convoy serving as a real-world trial. If true, the operation was a chilling demonstration of control over both technology and personnel, capable of making a unit vanish as if it had never existed. Family members of Colonel Maseko remained the most persistent voices. Thandi Maseko, refusing to accept silence, compiled records, testimonies, and even unofficial intelligence. Her efforts highlighted the human cost of secrecy. The families left with questions, rumors, and the possibility that their loved one's disappearance might never be officially explained. Experts and journalists weighed in, proposing multiple theories: a covert interception by internal actors, accidental entry into classified experimental zones, or even foreign intelligence involvement. Each theory added layers to the narrative, but none could fully account for the total vanishing. The South African Defense Force maintained its official stance. The convoy's fate was undetermined, with no new evidence to confirm theories of interception or concealment. Public statements avoided speculation, emphasizing operational security and procedural review. Yet, in private corridors and among investigative circles, a consensus was forming. The disappearance was neither accidental nor natural. It was meticulously planned, executed with precision, and protected by layers of secrecy. The vanished convoy had become more than a case. It was a symbol of the limits of transparency and the reach of controlled operations. The legacy of the operation remains unresolved. No bodies were recovered, no vehicles were found, and no definitive explanation has emerged. The story of Colonel Maseko's convoy is one of unanswered questions, hidden agendas, and a chilling demonstration of how easily a modern military unit can be erased from the record. As this chapter closes, the vanished convoy reminds us that some mysteries are never fully solved. They linger in memory, in documents, in whispers, and in the minds of those determined to pursue truth in the face of deliberate obfuscation. For families, investigators, and the world, the case of Colonel Maseko remains a haunting testament to disappearance, secrecy, and the enduring power of the unknown. The convoy vanished, but its story endures. Over a decade has passed since the night Colonel Jacob Maseko vanished with his convoy. The official story remains unchanged: a lost signal, a routine patrol gone wrong. But too many details refuse to align. Missing black boxes, deleted reports, and a stretch of land locals claim hums with energy when the wind turns east. Was this a military cover-up, or something far older, waiting beneath the African soil? In every mystery, there lies a truth waiting to be uncovered, and in every truth, a shadow we may not wish to face. Colonel Maseko's convoy may be gone, but echoes of their journey still ripple through time, faint transmissions that refuse to fade. If you felt the pull of the unknown, or believe the past never truly sleeps, help us keep the vault open. Like, share, and subscribe to Mystery Vault. Because as long as there are stories like this, we'll keep searching the dark for the truth that vanishes in plain sight.